everyone to another SBA Better Building Exchange live event. I feel really privileged again to have so many intelligent and passionate people in the room tonight and who live and breathe the topic of healthy homes. For those who don't know me, my name is Hamish White. I'm one of the founding directors of Sustainable Builders Alliance. I don't know why I need to read this because it's what I do for a living. I'm head of events at Sustainable Builders Alliance. I am the director of Sanctum homes and co-host of a podcast called The Mindful Builder. I'm going to invite Beck Kempster up here. Now, Beck is our first paid employee for Sustainable Builders Alliance, which is really exciting. And Beck is our COO, and I'm going to let her introduce herself, and she's also going to do a welcome to country.
Thanks, Hamish. I'm very excited to be here and doing this role with the Sustainable Builders Alliance. It's really exciting to be a part of this pathway for helping builders, architects and designers like yourselves build low and zero carbon homes. And that's what we really want to give you the confidence to do. So, that's what being here tonight is about. If you've got feedback on how we could do things better, or if you've got ideas on what we could do, then please reach out to me. I'd love to hear them. I acknowledge the people of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung, traditional custodians of the lands on which we're meeting today. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing connections and cultures to the land and waters. I also acknowledge and pay my respects to our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Beck, and good to see that you made it, Ben. Look, before we start, I want to see a show of hands of people who, in the past, have lived in or live in a home that's cold and leaky. Come on, everyone, put your hand up. All right. Visible mould. Who's had visible mould? Yep, okay. This is an ongoing problem in so many of the homes here in Australia, and what we're trying to do here today is help educate you. I'm sure a lot of you already know the things to do, but we're bringing together, I think, three really intelligent people today to talk to us how, as builders and designers and architects, from the very inception of an idea to the lived experience, we can live in healthy, comfortable homes. Of course, these events we wouldn't be doing these without our sponsors. Firstly, I want to thank Hip vs Hype, who have generously let us use this space for the past 12 months. I also want to, actually, I've got a prize to give away first. Now, if you already know the answer, don't put your hand up. But whoever can name this business, actually, don't just read it because it's not how it's phonetically spelt. But I want to see anyone put your hand up and tell me what this business is called. I'm not giving it to you. So Hygge have come on as a platinum sponsor for us for SBA. Now James and Adam are set up the back there, and I was hoping to pass around a section, but I think it might be a bit too clunky. Oh, there's one right here. I'm going to pass this around and maybe just have a look at it as the presentations go on, just so you can have a look at the quality. Hygge, I'll read their little spiel here. With a strong dedication to providing high-performing homes, the team has meticulously sourced windows and doors from the furthest corners of Europe to ensure best-in-class performance every time. Hygge believes that windows are the soul of a home, profoundly influencing its performance, functionality, and aesthetic appeal. Their commitment to quality and sustainability is reflected in their choice to import only alu-clad timber windows crafted from FSC and PEFC certified pine. Their windows are not just built to last generations, but also highly recyclable, embodying their dedication to environmental stewardship. By all means, at the end, go and have a chat with James and the team up there and have a look at their windows and doors, because they are pretty cool. You'll notice, and a lot of you guys and girls have Moondog beers in your hands. I met Ben or one of the partnerships directors at an event last year at RecLink. And I thought to myself, if these guys are supporting someone like RecLink, I thought maybe they'd want to support an organisation like SBA. So massive shout out to Moondog. And we do have a couple of events planned at Moondog venues this year. They've got Moondog OG in Abbotsford, Moondog World in Preston, Moondog Doglands at Docklands, and Moondog Wild West in Footscray. And we also have a door prize today, which we're going to give out at the end of the presentation. Now, this is also our first partnered event with our mates from Architects Declare. Now, believe it or not, if it wasn't for this gentleman sitting up here, Stephen Welsh, reaching out to Simon Clark in 2019, there's a really good chance that SBA wouldn't exist today. So, Stephen, thank you for making that phone call. And I do want to make a shout out to the other directors of SBA. Simon's here, Jesse's up the back there, Murph's behind the counter over there. We've also got Michael Lim, Jeremy Spencer, where are you? You're here. Yep. And of course, Brian Guinan. It's a bit challenging for him to get there from Perth, so we won't hold that against him. But yep, if you listen to the Sustainable Builders Yak, you would have heard Simon and Brian. Now, some housekeeping before we start. The sequencing of today's event is going to be set up in a way that you're going to build your knowledge. So we're going to have Dr. Fiona Gray from Bioliving by Design. We're then going to hear from Luke Rhodes from Zen Architecture, followed by Jess Allen from Climasure and the Building Sociology Potty. And then we are also joined by Delia Teschendorff. Did I get that right? Awesome. We'll then join Fiona, Luke and Jess on stage for a Q&A. So if you do have any questions throughout the first presentations, please just jot them down because we'll have a roaming mic at the end. Toilets at the back, rubbish, there's some bins at the back there. There's obviously food and drink. I am going to call Fiona up to the stage.
Alrighty, hi. Thanks for coming. It's really lovely to see some familiar faces here and also lots of new faces. I've been looking forward to this event and getting to speak about something that I really care deeply about, which is health and wellbeing. And I guess I wanted to kick off the conversation by sharing a personal story because I think that speaks to my why of why this stuff is really important to me. And I hope that also through that sort of personal story, it might give some insight into why the issue of healthy homes is just so important. So this photo here is of my little boy when he was 5 months old. He's now a big boy. He's 6'4" and 25 years old, just about to turn 26. So that's certainly carbon dating me and giving you an idea of how old I am. But this was him in the Royal Children's Hospital when he was admitted one night after we had fed him dinner and he just started projectile vomiting everywhere and he became floppy in my arms and he just went deathly white. And we lived relatively close to the hospital and we just figured that actually the quickest way to approach this was just to throw him in the car and get him to the emergency department. We got to the emergency department and by that stage he was unresponsive and his heart was barely beating. That then really started for us a long journey. There was this photo here was taken only about a week and a half after that particular incident. So he looks like a healthy, chubby, happy baby, and he had been, but that really got us on a journey that we weren't planning, and he went through a whole bunch of testing, and I was just faced with a stream of specialists, paediatric specialists, asking me the same questions over and over again to try and figure out what was wrong. Everyone was scratching their heads, couldn't figure out what had happened to him. They finally ended up bringing in an immunologist who, she was very well recognised, had sort of was a leader in the field, and she put her finger on the idea that this could be allergies. And no, I had previously been going backwards and forwards to the doctors in the weeks leading up to this, going, I think there's something really, really wrong here. And the doctors were sort of saying, well, he looks healthy and, he's probably just a bit colicky. And I was going, no, he's in real pain. He's drawing his legs up into his tummy and he's just screaming. And I was largely dismissed as, sort of a first-time mum who didn't really have the skills, I suppose, to settle an unhappy baby. So it wasn't until, we ended up in this situation that people started taking it seriously. And then this immunologist said, well, I think it's actually allergy related. He didn't present with the typical symptoms of anaphylaxis where you get the swollen tongue and the lips. There wasn't those telltale signs. It was systemic. It was his heart that was struggling to beat, and actually it would beat too fast and then it just wouldn't pump blood. So it was a very traumatic kind of experience. And when they decided to do their first food challenge, we almost lost him at that stage. So that started a process of every single food that we introduced to him throughout the next 2 years of his life had to be done in a hospital setting, because he was even anaphylactic to apples. The next thing we tried was apple puree, and he went into full anaphylaxis from that. So his allergies were so extreme. And of course, as his mum, I really was desperate to understand why that had happened, that no one could sort of seem to explain it. And because this was so long ago, this was before the big wave of those allergies that are quite common now. Nearly every classroom has a kid with an EpiPen, but back then that wasn't the case. So anyway, I just sort of, I suppose I don't know whether you call it mother's intuition or the fact that I was bringing my lens as an architect to this, but I just felt that it could have been the environment that we were living in. And the reason why I thought that is because the place that we were living in was pretty shit. It was a shop. It wasn't a traditional house. It was a shop, and we had set up my architectural practice out the front, and we lived in the shop out the back. So that meant that it had 2 party walls, the whole length of the building, which meant no windows, no natural ventilation. The clunky old heating system had broken down, so we had unflued gas heaters keeping us warm because it was bitterly cold. And it was basically just a toxic cocktail, because we'd also renovated. We hadn't used any sort of eco paints or anything like that. I was kind of oblivious to any of that sort of stuff. So we'd painted, we'd varnished just before he was born. Our home was just this sort of really unhealthy environment. And this was actually, because it was an old bank, this story was done, and I just wanted to point out that you won't be able to see that there, but it says a bland suburban bank has been transformed into a colourful and comfortable family home. It was not that. It was that was the journalist's take on things. It was anything but that. So I started doing a whole bunch of research going, I feel like it could be this environment that he's in. But back then there wasn't really, that was just a theory, and there wasn't really any science to support it. And I believe in science, so I was like, am I crazy? But over the years, and even still now, we're starting to learn about the connection between indoor air quality and outdoor air quality, actually, and allergies. So we've always kind of understood that is a problem for asthma and things like that, but there hadn't been that connection with allergies. So this was just published. You might have seen there was got a bit of publicity on the ABC last year around air pollution associated with persistent peanut allergies in the first, and that persists throughout the first 10 years of a child's life. And there's also been other research, recent research. So while this has sort of been validating to some extent, I didn't kind of need that research to confirm what I felt like I already knew from the research that I'd been doing over many years around what makes a healthy home. And I'd also researched far more broadly that, once you sort of go down that rabbit hole, you start to realise the impact that our homes can have on our health and well-being. And the reason why I'm sharing this story is because Our homes, many of our homes are still making people sick, and I don't think people recognise just how sick our homes can make some people. Doesn't mean that everyone will be affected the same way, but some people can be very severely impacted by that. And I think as builders, architects, we have an opportunity to really change that. So I don't want to go through a whole laundry list of what these sort of things can happen in your home, but some of the health impacts are things like toxic materials that you'll find in your flooring, in your paints, in your sealants, adhesives that are used throughout your home. We know that they can disrupt your endocrine system, so basically your hormonal system, which has issues for your fertility, childhood development, impacts your sleep. Things, of course, most people are familiar with the idea of mould and damp and how that can lead to chronic respiratory illnesses, fatigue, and a weakened immune function. Allergies are very related to a weak immune function, and that's why a lot of kids outgrow their allergies, because their immune system gets stronger. And also poor indoor air quality triggering asthma, allergies, and impair cognitive function over time. So many of these issues arise even in homes that some people label sustainable. And I think the issue with that has largely been around the fact that sustainable has often become synonymous with the idea of energy efficient. But as I'm sure many of you know, energy efficient does not necessarily equal healthy. Energy efficient homes, they absolutely are vital for, we want tightly sealed homes. We want homes that are well insulated, designed to minimise our heating and cooling loads, because that is vital to making a home sustainable. But the energy efficient doesn't necessarily equate to healthy, because we know some of the challenges that energy efficiency can throw up. So things like, if we're not ensuring that we have good ventilation and air filtration, if we're really tightly sealed, then of course you've got the off-gassing, so you're trapping chemicals, trapping moisture and that sort of thing. I think most people are fairly familiar with that idea now. Often overlooked, though, I think, is plastics. Plastics are a big issue when we start to talk about energy efficiency, because a lot of energy efficient materials, and to make our buildings so airtight, we're often using a lot of plastic. We see it in insulation, we see it in our sealants, heating and cooling, and mechanical heat recovery system filters. They become a major source of microplastics. Even if not in the building itself, they also end up at the end of life going into the environment and becoming a real issue. So there was some this is very recent research, this one here, about the bioaccumulation of microplastics in our brains. This was only just released this year. And I could not believe that when I read this, because it said that there was 7 grams of plastic, the equivalent of a 7-gram plastic spoon in our brains. And I was like, how much is 7 grams? And that's 2 spoons that I had in my drawer that are plastic. That's what 7 grams of plastic looks like. So I can understand that you might think that is ludicrous, like it kind of seems unbelievable. But this is rigorous, peer-reviewed research that actually appeared in Nature Medicine, which is one of the most highly regarded academic journals. And so I feel like that, what I worry about is, we've got plastics in so many of our materials. It's become ubiquitous in our built environment, and not just associated with energy efficiency either, also in things like waffle pod slabs, and there's a lot of plastic in our buildings now. So it's become so ubiquitous, I'm really quite concerned that that's our next asbestos, and that it has the potential to create a public health crisis on the scale of asbestos. And the really deep irony around this, to me, is that we're using these materials in the name of sustainability. So, if something is harming the planet, harming people, how can we be calling it sustainable or healthy? It's neither of those things. So I just wanted to also broaden it out, though, because health isn't just about disease. It's also, I wanted to sort of talk to the World Health Organisation's definition of health, and they they state that health is a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease. So it's not just about toxic materials and meeting energy efficiency standards. It's far more than that, you know. I think we need to be looking at health in a much more holistic sense. And that sort of one-size-fits-all approach isn't going to be the right approach for everybody. So there's some broad health principles that we should be applying, but there's also, I think we need to look at the individual occupants and their specific needs to really understand the individual circumstances. So, for example, if you've got asthma, of course you're going to be wanting to look at low VOC materials, good ventilation. That's going to be your primary focus. If you've got a child with autism, though, their health needs are going to be different. You might need to be looking at your soundproofing in your building. You might be needing to look at textures. You know, they might need soft textures, or they might actually need textural stimulation. So what are the materials that you're using to actually offer that sort of stimulation to them? That you need to think about the lighting. You know, if you've got lighting that is an imperceptible flicker, is that going to really impact a child with autism? Also, we're looking at, you know, if you've got depression or seasonal affective disorder, the things we might be doing for that person's health might be the way we orientate the building so that their bedrooms are getting flooded with morning light. It's, you know, it's switching on those hormones that will actually help with depression. So there's lots of different aspects to health, and I think we need to start thinking about health in a much more holistic way rather than just talking about mould, because health is about much more than that in the built environment. So I think, you know, I guess what I'm trying to say is that designing is really, for health, is a nuanced process. You probably can't read any of this, but this is just sort of like a little extract of the sort of thing that I do with clients. I don't work as an architect anymore. I work as a healthy building consultant and biophilic design consultant. And really the aim of that is to work with homeowners to do a really deep dive into their specific needs and ask sort of questions that would not normally get asked, even if they come with a brief that they want a healthy home. And then basically what I try and do is create a tailored prescription, much like a doctor would prescribe for a patient. Every patient has different health concerns. Well, every home will have a different prescription based on the needs of that individual or family. And then the idea is that information up front can then be tailored into the brief and incorporated in a really holistic way and carried right through the whole construction process and post-construction as well, so that the use of the building stays healthy after, you know, you've handed over the keys. I just wanted to say it takes more than good intentions to create a healthy home. A lot of it is about collaboration. You know, the homeowner, I think we really need to give them the respect to understand that they know their health issues better than we do as professionals, and we need to listen to that and respect that and then work with that. The architect then takes all of that information, translates it into something functional and beautiful and health promoting, and then it goes to the builder. I think that is our last line of defence. It is so important that the builder, you know, the design can be as great as you like, but if the execution isn't there, it all sort of falls down. So the builders have such a vital role in making sure we have healthy homes. Okay, where am I at? Okay, so the last thing that I just wanted to finish on was just to say that a quote from Arthur Schopenhauer, this is a very old quote, but he said, "Health is not everything, but without health, everything is nothing." And I absolutely believe that from my own personal experience, but also the experience of other people that I've seen. When they lose their health, all of the other stuff that we're doing kind of goes out the window. It's just so important. And so I suppose the thing that I wanted to finish on was that maybe just a call to action to understand that health matters, and it really does, like it has real world implications. So thank you for being here and being interested in healthy homes.
Fiona, before you step down, do you want to take the opportunity to tell everyone about the Substack that you have?
Yeah, thanks. Okay, this is a shameless plug. I did have a QR code there, but anyway, if you go, I'm just about to start a Substack. I should launch it tomorrow or Monday. It's set up, so if you want to go and subscribe, do a freebie subscription, and then because I'm going to be writing about all of this stuff on a regular basis. So if you want to subscribe and learn a bit more about this stuff in a bit more detail rather than a 15-minute, just speaking at you. The handle is at Dr. Fiona Gray, or if you just search my name, Fiona Gray, or the publication name itself is called Dwell Well. So I'd love just for you to get on board and give it a little bit of support. That'd be fantastic. Thanks.
Thanks, Fiona. Before I hand over to Luke, come up. I do want to do like a little bit of a boring disclaimer. Sorry, we need to protect ourselves. All content provided by Sustainable Builders Alliance and the presenters should be used as general guidance and for reference purpose only. Always seek independent advice and, if required, verification, no matter the circumstance, including but not limited to instances where loss or damage may occur. No account has been or will be taken into consideration for specific circumstances. No content should be relied on in that way. Views and opinions are solely personal and that of the person at the time of publication, and may not reflect the views and opinions of Sustainable Builders Alliance. Sustainable Builders Alliance makes every effort to ensure content is accurate at the time of release. Sustainable Builders Alliance accepts no responsibility for any content that may become inaccurate over time. Sorry, I had to do that.
That was Rick Zen, our founding director. He's with us tonight, thank you. We'll get to that slide in a second. Thanks everyone. I'm really honoured to be here on behalf of Zen Architects tonight. Founding director Rick Zen with us. There's also a few other great architects who have been through the firm and helped shape where we are today who are with us tonight, so really appreciate the support. Felt like I had to start with a bit of a history of where we came from, because there's a few key defining moments through that sort of shapes what I'm going to talk about today. So here's Rick, his first office in Fairfield in the late 80s, under siege from a torrential rainstorm, box gutter overflow, flooding back into the office. Great start. Rick's goal from the outset was to merge the art of architecture and the science of building performance to address how we could minimise our impact on nature and nurture our clients. At this time, there was no internet, there was no website, buildings weren't photographed and documented as they are today, and it was unethical for architects to advertise their services. So this necessitated a move in the early 90s to North Carlton, where we could start to work with our community. And as we started to work within the community, we realised pretty quickly that it made sense to respect the local context and work with it rather than against it, as the next door neighbour of your project could be your next client. So that was something I think key that was really important in shaping our early stages. In 1994, saw the completion of Zen House No. 1 in Fitzroy North, pretty iconic little building for those who travel down Brunswick Street North. It was a renovation and extension project that sought to minimise material usage, maximise efficiency, reduction, reuse and recycling with zero waste, and it sought to regrow 100% of the material used in its construction. Zen House later became the Zen headquarters for nearly 2 decades in a really significant time for the practice. Our first fully electric home was completed in 1992 in Jackie's Marsh in Tasmania. The first autonomous house in 1999, photographed here, Point Addis Solar House, We've been working on this stuff for a long time. In the early noughties, we brought in-house energy rating, and this really allowed us to test ideas in real time and really accelerate our learning. In 2007, we took part in the Sustainable Affordable Housing Initiative through Vic Urban, Department of the State Government, and it was to develop 7.5-star houses on greenfield sites of between 150 and 300 square metres with various orientations and to maintain a 7.5-star energy rating regardless of orientation. So there were a few iterations that were provided to deal with those various orientations. Some had cars at the back, accessed via a laneway. Some had cars at the front, depending on the orientation. They were 130 square metre, 3-bedroom houses, and they were designed to allow single parent incomes with 2 kids to break into the housing market in a really dignified way. Our first carbon neutral home in operation was Eco House in Fitzroy North. That was completed in 2010. It was a 115 square metre house, housing a family of 6. There was a single light fitting and power outlet in each room. That was it. There was no built-in cabinetry aside from the kitchen. Kids shared bedrooms, bunks, and side-by-side. I think there's a really good moment in our history to jump into today's topic and focus in a little bit more. I'm not going to go into too much technical detail today, but I think a higher level conceptual process that we go through on every project that we think is really important in all of our projects. Here's a more recent photo of our practice. Shaped by our past experience, our approach is a more holistic approach to sustainability. It's a view on healthy environments, healthy buildings and healthy people, and how they interact. In our view, these concepts, they need to be considered from the first site visit, from the first interaction with the client, and they need to be evident in the first line that's drawn on paper. They can't just be overlaid at the end of the process. And so I think, with all that in mind, I believe some of our greatest success is measured by over the last 36 years. We've had less than a dozen of our houses sell or pass on, and even less have been renovated. It speaks to the longevity that can be created following these processes. The concepts that I'm going to talk about can loosely be defined in sort of 4 categories. Local context, the site, the building itself, and the interiors. The local context. Within this topic, subtopics of history, community, and the client are evident. The history can be a reference to the existing conditions of the site and its relationship to the streetscape and also to the broader community. The memory of its past use can be a really powerful tool. It really says something about the client's intentions, and I think it is a real reflection and outward reflection to the community of what you intend to bring to them. Our art house was a dilapidated building. It was beyond repair. Had a building report condemning the structure. There was no heritage overlay in this instance to save it. So our clients who had lived in the street for many years couldn't bear to see it demolished. So they bought it, engaged us, and it lives on. In a different context, on a major boulevard overlooking the ocean, this is our Boulevard Beach House. The memory of the existing previous structure revived and renewed and brought into relevance to contemporary life. And then our passive house, a completely different context again, but this a previously vacant bush block. and how careful sighting and real interrogation of the existing conditions can minimise the loss of impact, the loss of vegetation within a bushfire overlay. Really tricky things to navigate. We see architecture as a way to connect to the community through design gestures that invite the community in. By removing front fences and having open gardens, letting the public see into private spaces and inviting the street and neighbourhood interactions, these are all techniques that can help people connect with their community and for the community to connect to our buildings. For the sustainable house here, there was no front fence, operable timber louvers at the front, allowing two-way views, able to be moderated when required through the operation of the louvers. This is our trail house. Our clients had bought this property in Melbourne's eastern suburbs, having relocated from the UK, and they really wanted to connect with their new community. So here we also removed the front fence, an open, inviting garden. We provided a carport instead of a garage, again, more open and inviting. We retained 3 significant trees on the site and worked within them. And really the success of that was when the clients moved in and the amount of people within the street who would just come up to the front door, knock, introduce themselves. They really loved that outcome, and I think it helped them settle in really quickly. So next topic is the site. Subtopics within this are climate, surrounding natural environment, and borrowed landscapes. Upon the first site inspection, we looked for free and abundant natural resources available on site. Sunlight, breezes, shade, watercourses, slope, ground conditions can all be used to our advantage to create natural comfort and health. For our autonomous house in Jan Juk, our client set up a camp in a clearing on the site provided by a fallen tree. And with the help of an Indigenous elder, he observed the sun, the land, the water paths, and the native flora and fauna. The final siting in the clearing created by the tree, where the client had set up camp, minimised tree removal within a bushfire overlay. And it was adjacent the dry creek bed running through at the bottom of the page, but also adjacent that was a wallaby track, which wrapped around the back of the house, left uninterrupted through construction. A sunken lounge was inserted right next to that wallaby track to get you right down next to the action and really connect with nature. So on to borrowed landscape. We're always looking to expand the connections of the client and encourage a more shared experience. A great way to do that is to look for opportunities to integrate distant landmarks beyond the site and expand the dimensions of the site, the perceived dimensions of the site. With our garden house, here we look out over a historic garden estate in Eaglemont with no rear fences, all backing onto public shared land. The majority of these trees that you see are on public land, not within the title boundary. And you're free to move in and out throughout the development. In a completely different context and a completely different solution, this inner city house can still generate similar outcomes. In this instance, the clients were hell-bent on a pool. They were on an east-west facing site, attached houses both sides, 2-storey wall on the northern boundary, running almost the full length of the boundary. So how do we fit in a pool into that scenario? In this case, we flipped the floor plan upside down to create an upside-down house, living on the top. There was already an existing terrace, which remains here untouched, as we found it. But it was connected to a bedroom previously. So friends, family coming over would never go up to there, never experience the terrace because of the disconnect to the living. The living was hunkered down, quite low, quite dark. Backyard was probably about 3 metres wide at best. So in this instance, bringing the living upstairs, bringing it up into the light, to be able to capture the breezes, to be able to connect outside, was a really key gesture. We also had to sensitively navigate heritage guidelines in this instance to insert a pool on a heritage street next to a heritage house. During lockdowns, this 4-bedroom house accommodated 7 adults, and they had the best of times. They still remind me of it every day. I spoke to them only about 4 weeks ago, and they still remind me of that time, which is incredible. When everyone else was going through quite a lot, they prospered. Next topic, the building. So this can incorporate orientation, layout, and building performance. So through in-house energy, coming into the practice, and being able to test ideas and systems out, we uncovered that building systems needed to respond to various site conditions and that no one system was suitable for all sites. Through that process, the aesthetic was almost driven by the performance requirements. In this particular project, we had north to the side. We had an abundance of natural light, ventilation, so we used the high thermal mass approach, thermal mass floors, thermal mass walls, double height voids, to be able to harness that energy and utilise it to moderate temperatures within the house. Whereas on this house, we had a different problem. It's a heritage renovation and extension. We had an Edwardian with a large roof to the north of us, north to the front of the site. So how we could bring light over the top back into the house, but still keep that high level of performance. And here we needed to turn to more lightweight construction. We needed to focus on air tightness more so, and window area, to create a more responsive internal environment that required smaller bursts of energy to heat and cool. Our eco house was a single-fronted, fully attached house on a tight site, double brick walls to boundaries. The solution was an upside-down house to elevate into the living into the light and to capture breezes. Lightweight construction front, rear, and for floors also allowed us to, with tightly controlled openings, allowed us to moderate that site condition. And then onto the interiors. We feel that generosity in volume and connection, not in floor area, is the key here. The greater the floor area, the more the material usage. We need to try and cut that down as much as possible. We figured that healthy people need healthy buildings that need healthy environments. So we wanted to connect people with nature in every way possible, using all their senses, and to share these experiences with family, friends, neighbours, and community. In this, our local house, we had the rare opportunity for a new house on a large block. So we were able to orient the building correctly, which was a big bonus. Here we're looking into a 4-metre high volume in the living areas with tightly controlled glass to floor area ratios, and each window serving a very specific purpose. To the north, we have large sliders that open out onto external living, connecting the internal and external living spaces. A picture window following that, looking directly out onto an elevated garden. A high-level north window capturing the view of an endemic tree, hundreds of years old. And the high left, to the left, top left of this is a high-level west-facing window which captures sunsets. Another example of a north to the front, over a heritage building. In this instance, we find that if you give a little, you can often gain a lot. So for this particular house, a tiny addition of 6 square metres, but with the subtraction of some of the internal floor area, we prioritised volume and connection. So we inserted a roof garden, a ground floor courtyard, and a better connection back to the rear. This was what we started with. Our Richmond warehouse was an existing art gallery that our clients had been passed on from family. This was a process of subtraction rather than addition. We had volume in this instance already on site, so we worked with that volume to, I suppose, utilise that to house the required program, and then peeled away the structure to insert a garden space within that, facing north, so that we had that connection, the opportunity to go outside, connect with the garden. And in this instance, our greenhouse, our client had mapped the sun paths throughout the year. They required light, connection, and a healthy environment to deal with debilitating disease. We utilised courtyards, voids, roof gardens, indoor plants were on casters to follow the sun throughout the year, and we even used air plants as curtains. So that's the end of the conceptual considerations of our practice. And the last thing I want to leave you with is just documentation and construction, because it's all well and good to go through that process, but if it's not clearly defined to the builder, then we have no hope of achieving anything. We're hearing time and time again that builders are being delivered with minimal documentation, PCs and provisionals in place of significant scope. I think we are actively trying to work in the opposite direction. We're spending more time on site and more time with our clients during design and documentation, and more time with our builders on site. Ultimately, we want our clients to enjoy waking up every day, experiencing changing conditions, changing seasons and changing light qualities throughout the year via considered apertures, and being comfortable inside but being drawn out. We find this has a profound impact on our clients and often leads them towards a more considered way of life.
I really love that narrative of like nurturing your clients. I find that, and the fact that the practices, and probably hats off to Rick, all electric 1992. Like, you were going all electric before it was cool. Like, that's pretty awesome. And I really love like that the practice focuses on extending health beyond physical health and focusing on mental health. Because all of the pictures that I saw up there, and I'm sure everyone can agree, lots of light, lots of plants, lots of volume, and how that can make you feel inside a home. Like Fiona was talking about physical health, but what you're talking about in your presentation is like the mental health of the occupants, and I find that that's pretty awesome, so thank you. Next up is Jess from Climasure and the building Sciology Potty.
Hello everyone, my name is Jessica and I am from South Australia. I work for a company called Climasure. A bit about my background: I started out in NatHERS compliance, so building code stuff. Did that for a number of years before I discovered blower door testing, and from there, kind of the rest is history. Sort of moved on to hygrothermal simulations and passive house, and now I work for a passive house builder in South Australia, and my job is to teach architects and builders how to do what he does, and what a lot of you in this room also do. So thank you to the SBA for having me here today. So 40% of new houses and apartments are experiencing mould. That's the current statistic that was put out in a study done, actually it's not so current, it was done I think 2015. Judging by the show of hands earlier, I think it's a lot more than that, and judging by my personal experience, I believe it's a lot more than that. And given that very high level of mould exposure in our homes, the fact that 25 to 30% of people are seriously impacted by mould illness should be cause enough for concern for sort of a much better collaborative effort in this space. So architects have a really key part to play in the health and well-being of homes and occupants, And you can do this via design and via your specification. Being aware of why this matters so much and how it goes beyond energy efficiency is also really important, because it's the why that drives us. The other really important thing is that it's a self-taught journey. Building science, building health is not taught in architecture school, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. The feedback I've had so far is that it's not taught. It's not taught to builders. The study I did a building design diploma, and it was actually taught somewhat. We were exposed to First Rate 5, but apart from that, that's where it finished. So when I discovered blower door testing through my previous job, I was like, this makes so much sense. Why is this not done? You know, it just makes sense. So the outcomes of all of these projects that you're all working on is very much dependent on your own drive to learn and to implement in your projects. Also, this discussion, my presentation is targeted towards architects because that was kind of the target audience. However, I know there is a healthy smattering of builders in here as well. So, but this applies to all of us in the room. But specifically for architects, your involvement is before anybody else's in a building project. And so understanding your role in that collaborative process is really, really key. So 3 quick tips on how an architect can actually help to improve the health outcomes of any building is to talk to your clients at the beginning of the design process and get their buy-in. So if this is something that you wish to implement for your client, sometimes a client will come to you and say, I really want a healthy home. And perhaps some of you in the room, those sorts of clients are your target market. But if not, they're still going to want to know about how to prevent mold in their homes. And we're discussing today health of all sorts in a home. It's not just about mold. However, I'm a building science consultant, so that's what I'm focusing on today, indoor air quality and mold. So yeah, getting the client to buy in. So if they're not aware of how mold may affect them, or how indoor air quality could be affected by the current requirements of the building code, or different building practices, then it's something that you can do is you can discuss this with them and get them to understand why you might be implementing certain things when they say, but that's going to cost more, or why would you do that? Getting them to understand why from the outset is going to sort of get rid of a lot of those conversations for you early on. Tip 2 is specify a blower door test. Who has done a blower door test or seen one? That's good, about 50%. Who doesn't know what a blower door test is? Good, excellent. All good, yep. So specifying a blower door test at the planning stage is probably the easiest, cheapest way to make sure that the structure that is going to be eventually built is going to be verified on site. There is no as-built verification currently in Australia, as you would all be aware. And that is a massive downfall in our industry. And blower door testing, and your blower door tester will probably also bring a thermal camera to look at the insulation coverage in the house, any thermal bridging issues, evident water issues. Specifying a blower door test on your documentation is something really cheap and easy that you can do in planning stage, documentation stage. The other thing is to detail external insulation on all steel. Architectural homes, they're big, they've got big sort of wide open rooms, and they often have steel in them. So steel is a thermal bridge, and it needs to be insulated, particularly in a climate zone such as this. So Fiona, you touched on trapped moisture. The building code is evolving. We are increasing our air tightness in our homes by default. Better windows are being specified and required by our energy assessments. Just by default, the levels of insulation are going up. We're creating warmer, more humid atmospheres inside our homes. We all emit a ton of vapour and moisture from our bodies in our lived experience every day. So breathing, showering and bathing, cooking, even our pot plants, and washing our clothes and our tumble dryers. I didn't have a heat pump tumble dryer the first time I bought one many years ago. Didn't think about it, and my whole laundry ceiling went mouldy. So we all emit a lot of moisture, and if we are increasing the air tightness of our structures, it's getting trapped. And therefore your risk of condensation and mould greatly increases. So, that's just what I basically said. The repeated wetting that is caused by condensation is what causes mould. Mould needs moisture to grow. So with increased air tightness, increased indoor relative humidity, then the vapour in the air sticks to the cold spots. So a catchphrase we have in our industry, my part of the industry, is cold spots equals mould spots. So any thermal bridge, any gap in your insulation is going to be a cold spot and has much higher risk for mould growth if it's got a porous surface over the top of it. For example, this corner of a window here. So that's a cold spot. Potentially there's air, it's not properly insulated around the window. There are many reasons that this could be happening. Potentially the window has not got proper insulation around it and it's just cold air inside the wall. Potentially there's a lintel above the window, it's not properly insulated for that reason as well. And the window frame could potentially be aluminium, I can't quite tell. Lots of reasons why that is a cold spot, and it is repeatedly getting wet and growing mould on the porous plasterboard, which is macas for mould, as we call it. The window here is my friend's kitchen. I've just recently come back from Europe, and that is double glazed UPVC windows. However, the windows still, like the condensation in that kitchen was insane because the ventilation was really, really poor. So, you know, the streets ahead of us overseas, but they also still have their problems to fix. So, blower door testing quantifies the amount of air the building envelope allows to move through it, and it gives us vital information to the builder and the homeowner about how to ventilate correctly. So, what is a recent blower door test result, if any of you have had one done? Stop bragging. Anyone else had a blower door test recently done, wants to share their result? Anyone else apart from Hamish? Yep. 0.29. Oh, getting close. So these guys are going to have mechanical ventilation in these homes because these are clearly very high-performing passive house standard homes. To achieve the passive house standard, you need to achieve under 0.6 air changes. The Australian average, according to a study done by ATMA, so ATMA is the Air Tightness Testing and Measurement Association of Australia. They recently collaborated with Michael Ambrose and did a study on air tightness in Australia. And they tested I was one of the testers, we did about 450 homes and apartments in Australia. The current average air change in Australia is 6.8 air changes. That has decreased from 15.4 air changes, which is the result from the previous study that was done by ATMA. So the air tightness in Australia, as I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, is naturally decreasing, it's naturally, improving. But what that number does is it quantifies the invisible nature of the air moving in and out of your building envelope, and it gives you information on how to ventilate correctly. So there's schools of thought on how much ventilation is required and how to ventilate based on the result of that blower door test. Anything under sort of 5 air changes is going to need some mechanical assistance. Otherwise, all of your breathing and cooking and showering is going to create a very humid indoor environment. And in a climate such as Melbourne, that's going to cause problems. So what that number does is just informs you on how best to address your ventilation. If you have anything under about 2 air changes, then you're probably going to need some mechanical assistance because opening and closing windows probably isn't going to cut it. So air leakage accounts for 25% of heat loss as well. So we want to make sure that we're keeping our bills down. They also allow rodents and pests in. like mice and cockroaches and spiders and ants. So that's also not great, and also doesn't make us feel very healthy and very nice. So we want to make sure that the gaps in our building envelope are separating outdoors from indoors. And it's not about, you're not going to suffocate inside your home if you improve the air tightness of it, but you do have to understand, it's important to quantify what the outcome is so that you can understand how to ventilate and how to live in that space. For specifying air tightness, I said one of the best things you can do is to specify a blower door test and specify air tightness. So the way to do that is what's called a red pen test. So the pen doesn't have to be red, it can be any colour, but what it is a line. It's a continuous line drawn around the air barrier of your design. So this is a floor plan example. I'll take you, I wonder if the link's going to work. Yes, so this is AVA, Air Infiltration and Ventilation Association of Australia. This is an air tightness testing guide specification for a home. So here, it details how you might specify a blower door test on your architectural plans. And this red line would be drawn around your floor plan and also around your elevations, your section details, and potentially also getting down to the nitty-gritty, any of your junction details as well. So floor, sort of if you've got like a second story, you would detail how that's going to be kept airtight, or any junction between a wall and a roof, you would detail how that is kept airtight with a line, so that that documentation can be given to the builder, and the builder can visually see, right, that there needs to look like that, or that there needs to go there. So it's really a very simple communication tool, the old red pen test. Thermal bridging prevention. So a thermal bridge is basically just an area of high heat or cool conductivity. So any steel that goes into your buildings, any gaps in insulation become a thermal bridge. Your timber frame is still a thermal bridge. Any join in construction, any join between the wall and the floor, wall and the roof, the ridge here on this skillion gable roof detail here, anywhere where there's a join. So one other hot tip for you is the more geometry you have, the more thermal bridging you have. So keeping your forms simple is a really good way to prevent heat loss and prevent condensation and mould risk through cold spots. So detailing for thermal bridging is really, really important. So basically, externally insulating any steel is how you're going to minimise or prevent or even eliminate any thermal bridging issues with steel. So these two are not the same project, but this is how this steel column on your right is a problem that was sent to me by a client, and they said, what do we do here? And I just said, well, externally insulate it, but this is past the design phase, this is construction phase. And the builder's going, oh, we can do this, but there's a window going there, and that means we have to have this thickness and that thickness of insulation, and we can't do this and we can't do that. So that is why this detailing at design phase is so important, because there's a knock-on effect. When you have to add thickness to a building element, it moves doors, it moves windows. And so getting all of this sorted out on a computer screen or a pen and paper before you get to site prevents people coming to me with questions like this and getting all stressed out about it. So I think what they ended up doing was 50 mil EPS on the external sides, and then 10 mil on the internal sides to allow for their windows. So that's still going to insulate that steel. It's still going to mitigate the condensation and mould risk at that corner. This one is a passive house detail for one of the projects I'm working on at the moment. So that one is completely encapsulated in insulation, and that one's going to stay quite warm. This is another passive house detail for another project I'm working on, and these do directly relate. So this one, this is a steel beam, the toe out, I believe the architectural term is, building term, for the beam, and it's basically filled with EPS to keep that steel warm. For passive house, you have to prove everything you've done, so that's why there's a tape measure there, proving the thickness of the insulation. But that is one solution for a beam. Here's another couple of details as well, just detailing how you would insulate steel to prevent thermal bridging issues. Of the architects here, do any of you work directly with a preferred builder? Yep. So you work collaboratively with those builders and you have an ongoing relationship and you communicate really well? Yeah, that is the ideal situation. So a lot of architects, from what I have in my experience, will have a design, they'll do a design and they'll pass it off to a builder, and then that's where the collaboration kind of ends. But if this is a suggestion I can make, would be to create, this may or may not be a good business model, I don't know, it's up to the individual to decide this, but a suggestion would be to create relationships with preferred builders who are also bought in to this better building stuff, so that you don't have an uphill battle. So you don't send somebody a detail like this and they go, what's that? How am I going to do that? Or what's the point of that? Or that's not the way I've always done it, or whatever else we all know that they say. And also a builder who has never done it before but is really willing to learn, they're the best ones, because that's new information and new clients that are going to get better homes. So I spend a lot of my time sort of figuring out, like, we'll get builders who come, they've gone to a high-end or a high-performance builder, and they'll say, I want this house, and then budget is too expensive. So they'll take that design or their ideas to a cheaper builder, and then they'll come back to me and they'll say, how do we implement all that cool stuff with my builder? And then I have to work out, well, how much is this builder willing to learn? How far can I make them go? How willing are they to take all of this on? Because as you also said this morning, earlier, Fiona, if you don't have buy-in from the people who are building the buildings, all of you fine builders here tonight, then you don't execute. So you can draw all the red lines and all the pretty details on a piece of paper, but if the person putting all that together and ordering the materials and checking on site is not on board, you're going to miss stuff. So collaborating with people who are like-minded or teaching people who want to learn that's the goal. Recap. So as architects, you have a huge influence over the health and well-being of the home and the occupants. You can do this via design through things that the previous presentation, talking about light and form and space and all of that, that beautiful stuff about how you feel. And then you can also have a really big impact on the health of the building and the occupants by making sure that they have good indoor air quality and ventilation, and making sure that the air tightness is quantified and appropriately ventilated. And you can also have a huge impact on the thermal bridging through making sure the steel is insulated. There are a lot more things that go into this, but I've only got 15, 20 minutes, so I had to pick a couple of really important ones, and they're the two big ones. Air tightness is critical, needs to be discussed at design stage. Thermal bridging must also be addressed during design, and collaboration ensures quality. So basically, in summary, the link between our buildings and our health is very strong, but this building science stuff is self-taught. So you guys have to take it upon yourselves to come to events like this, get on the Google, get on the podcast, get on the YouTubes, ask questions and learn as much as you can. So I encourage you all to keep doing what you're doing and sort of make sure that you're building healthy buildings and taking care of the health of the future occupants and your clients. So thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Jess. One of the big motivations of partnering with Architects Declare with this particular event and even future events is actually bringing these two groups of people together, because I do feel, and correct me if I'm wrong, that sometimes there is a bit of a disconnect there, and there seems to be a bit of a cluster of architects in the front there and the builders kind of are over at the back there. I'd really love to see those groups come together and really have meaningful discussions of what works in your practice and what works for that builder, and actually really defining that word of collaboration and like truly collaborating. So I'm hoping throughout this year, as we have more events with Architects Declare, that we can bring those two communities together and, we can deliver really amazing results for our clients. Before we jump into this panel discussion, I'm going to let you guys all get out of your seats, grab a drink, maybe grab some food and go to the bathroom, and then we'll come up here for a panel discussion.
I just thought it was just a wonderful process to hear about that you go through with your clients. And firstly, I was keen to know whether you actually go through the specification process as well. So you go through this sort of question series of assessing projects, and then do you actually go through a specification of assessing and working with the actual architects and designers as well?
The answer to that is yes, if architects want to work with me.
Okay, yep.
Yeah, I think it's really important that architects retain their, I am an architect, even though I'm not practicing as an architect, and I know, the love and care and the passion that goes into their buildings. And so I think the last thing you need is a consultant, coming in over the top and saying, actually, you really should be specifying this thing. I think if I've done my job properly at the outset, and I've written that prescription, and it's then the architect's job to translate that. And I'm absolutely happy to stay on board and work with architects and help with the specification. And sometimes architects don't have the time on projects to be able to do that. So I love nothing more than that sort of deep dive and really getting down into the weeds and reading data, safety data sheets and figuring out what chemicals have been used in a product and that sort of thing. But that's often architects don't want or need that. Or the client doesn't want or need that, or they can't pay for that. So it really depends on the project and the architect. But I'd love to be doing more work with architects.
Yeah, look, and I was also interested to know, because you said you like to do a post-occupancy assessment, whether you're seeing some great outcomes from that, or is it too early to sort of...
I've only been doing this very specialised sort of approach to for the last 18 months, and most of the work that I've been doing in this space has actually been with schools.
Yeah.
So it seems to be that schools are, that they often have, kids with behavioural challenges because there's health issues related to that, and so I haven't actually seen any schools through to... But normally with schools, what I'm doing is actually consulting with them when they've already got other architects on board and they're getting their designs in, and then it's almost like a peer review process where it comes to me to really take on that health lens and look at it that way. So
yeah, great. And I guess now going to Luke from Zen. And this applies to everyone actually, because I was actually just saying to Stefan earlier that there's only 5% of buildings in Australia that architects are involved in, which isn't a huge amount, and it's a shame. So really one of the major problems is that the mainstream housing and quality isn't getting that level of input and thought, and obviously clients come to Zen knowing your work and knowing what you can do with a building, which is a great privilege, but often the cost of an architect's just out of reach. So I was really interested to see that you did an affordable housing project for Vic Urban, where you were actually designing affordable homes for people who usually couldn't afford an architect. And I think that's fantastic that you're actually designing these homes that could be accessible to someone on a single income, which is amazing. So why didn't that go further? Why wasn't what you were just doing for the mainstream housing space adopted? What sort of prevented that being adopted?
So that was 20 years ago,
Yeah.
that process. I think it was just at a period of time where smaller wasn't seen as better. Higher performance wasn't necessarily given the kudos that it should have been. I think, it was built on a greenfield site, and there were people offering cheaper, larger offerings at the time. And so I think, it's a real shame because it had a lot of merit, that process. Two of the projects got built, but that was kind of where it died, unfortunately, and nothing uptaken from there. But we did work with project home builders through that process to get the costs on a comparable level. But to achieve that at 7.5 stars, which is still above today's minimum standards 20 years later, meant that they were smaller, but they were more efficient. They had, less corridor, less wasted space. They utilised the site a lot better. Opportunities for cars from the rear rather than cars taking up, prime real estate. Allow children to play in the streets, in the front yards, rather than being confined to the backyards and cars taking up the front. So there are a lot of really good ideas in there. But sadly, as you say, only 5%. I actually thought it was less. Architects involved, and the mass market took over.
And I guess that's one of the challenges, isn't it? Getting these fantastic ideas that you three have shared with us today, embraced by that broader mass market and the broader audience, and actually finding a way to communicate to that broader mass market, but also convincing people that sustainable and healthy isn't going to cost too much either. So what are your thoughts on that in terms of communicating that message?
Yeah, we've just recently completed a collective development where we had 10 individual clients come together, pooled their funds, built a 10-unit housing development at cost. So no real estate, no sale, so no stamp duties or anything like that. So, and that was delivered at about 4,200 a square metre as an apartment typology, which is well below the market currently. So we're still tackling these issues. We're finding ways to make them relevant to more people, but it's not easy. I think we've got to promote these things better. I think our institute probably needs to do a bit more in terms of advocacy to be able to get these ideas out to the mass market and promote the benefits of architecture that we can bring.
And I think a big takeaway from your talk also was big is not better, definitely not better. It costs more. It has a negative impact environmentally. We can achieve so much with a smaller way of approaching the design of our buildings. Also, I just, Fiona, wanted to ask you whether, in terms of health and wellbeing, connection to place and nature is such an important aspect of health and wellbeing, and whether you draw on any sort of First Nation knowledge and thinking around that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. So I call myself a healthy building consultant and biophilic design consultant. So I love nature. I spend most weekends hiking, and I know the health benefits that come from that, not just physically, mentally as well. And I think, bringing nature into our built environment is you know, it used to just kind of be, well, yeah, that's a nice thing to do, but actually there's really robust science behind that now as well that's starting to develop, that's actually showing physiological effects. You know, if we're using natural materials, it's, you know, timber, for example, it might, and plants and natural daylight has things, it actually lowers our blood pressure. You know, it has psychological effects, it has cognitive effects. So I think actually when we think about health, we need to be thinking about that connection with nature. And of course, in Australia, in an Australian context, that absolutely means a connection to place. And I think, you know, Luke demonstrated that really well, that deep knowledge and wisdom, we need to actually go back to a lot of that. Because, I mean, evolutionarily, is that a word? I don't know, I think I just made that up. Is that a word? I don't know. In terms of evolution, you know, we were an outdoor species. We have been for, you know, thousands of years, and it's really only a blip in time that we've become an indoor species. And now, of course, you know, that sort of frequently rolled out statistic that we spend 92% of our time indoors. There is that real disconnect. And I think if we can go back to, you know, that Indigenous wisdom of how we actually connect with the land and our environment and respect it, and yeah, I think that's a really powerful way to start to bring nature back into our lives. And I don't mean just, you know, putting a few pot plants around. I'm talking about, you know, the colours of nature, the textures, the scents, the soundscaping of nature. You know, like what happens when we make our buildings completely airtight, but you lose the connection to birdsong and, you know, hearing the rustle in the breeze. What happens when your body can't feel the difference in temperature between the middle of winter and the middle of summer? Like, actually our bodies are tuned to, actually we thrive on having that variation. So while it's really important to create these buildings that are high performing, we also have to remember that it's not a great idea to keep them completely locked up all of the time, because there's other aspects of our innate nature that requires that connection.
Yeah, and Luke, I wanted to go back to you to talk about material selections, and I guess for a lot of the builders in the audience, this is probably a big thing to consider as well, and I'm sure you want to make some comments about it, but just in terms of material selection and production of waste on site, and your thoughts on the importance of specifying local materials and trying to minimise that waste, like how many skips are getting removed from a building site every week, and all of that stuff is so important, and that ties back into the production of microplastics, and you know, it's all a consideration through the whole sort of construction cycle. If you could talk to that, I mean both of you, but yeah, even so, yeah.
It's something that we've considered for a long time. I think going back to an earlier example I put forward of Rick's house back in 1994, where the intention was to regrow 100% of the materials used in the construction and have no waste. So it's something we've been investigating for a long time. It's becoming increasingly more difficult. We're finding that builders are so much more risk adverse these days, that finishers, I don't know, due to maybe the pretty images that we see on Instagram, social media, that every junction and every little skerrick of a building needs to be perfect, where we quite embrace the imperfect in that, and try and challenge the norms of what is the desired outcome. And so where, you know, a length of timber might be docked because of a defect, we encourage its use. We look at ways that we can detail what's behind the finish to allow for odd lengths to be used, or, a critical one that we always come up against is we don't like to glue our timber floors. We put down a plywood substrate and nail into them. When you come across a 100-year-old or more Victorian or Edwardian house with Baltic pine floors, we can pull them up and reuse them. We can seal the subfloor space. Once they're glued down, they're gone. They're not coming back up. So we've also found that none of the houses that we've done that on have had an issue with the floor. But as soon as we glue them, there's problems. Like, it moves, it opens up, and it can't be rectified. And so does that then become something the client has to live with, or does it become waste? That's something that we deal with every day, and it's becoming harder. And so finding builders who are engaged in this is becoming a really critical consideration for our tender lists and builders that we work with, and what we want to do moving forward.
And Jess, I was also interested hearing your talk, and just wondering about, again, how do you reach a broader audience to adopt these sort of practices that you were talking about?
It's very difficult. There has to be an interest. We do training events where I work on building science principles. We do blower door testing demonstrations, and we extend invitations to across all of our social media channels and our mailing lists, and we try to get people in. But fighting against perception is very, very difficult, and the rate of conversion, if people aren't interested, is quite low. Unfortunately, the volume builder space, there is a very low uptake on anything better building. They are very cost conscious, and that makes sense. Converting, there is a real element in this space of preaching to the converted, and that is something that I have personally made a real effort to reach outside of. I was sort of personally, in things that I'm doing, I try to reach outside of that, but over time, it becomes increasingly clear that it's a really tricky thing to do. So if anyone's got any hot tips, let me know. Yeah, good idea. Good idea, Ham. And that is one thing I have done to try and get information out as Hamish says, start a podcast, to get information out as widely and broadly as possible. Because this information, when you know better, you can do better, and if you don't know better, where can you go with that? So I just try my very best to spread information as far and wide as I possibly can. But unfortunately, some people just won't be taught, and that's why I said in my talk, getting builders who are open to learning is gold.
One more question, and then so I sort of feel like you three could be working together in terms of this theme of health and wellbeing in homes. And I mean, Fiona, I think your work has, it's a critical thing in terms of you could be talking to the government and hopefully trying to influence policy in terms of the way we're building our homes, and really thinking about that. And maybe you could use a Zen house as a sort of post-occupancy assessment of how healthy they are, and these are the ways we should be doing things. What are your thoughts on getting that broader reach with this really important research you're doing and this new business that you've started?
It is hard. So in a former life, not that long ago, before I started this practice, in fact, my very last role, I was the CEO at Renew. And so that was in...
Great magazine.
Yeah, great magazine, great Sanctuary magazine, so Renew magazine, Sanctuary magazine, give them a plug, an amazing sustainability-based organisation. But oh my goodness, it is hard work, that advocacy piece. And it's loveless, you know, like no one wants to pay for that. Everyone wants it, but actually no one wants to pay for it. So, you know, as a not-for-profit, that's a very difficult situation that, you know, that they're writing white papers, they're, you know, putting submissions into government, and all of that is unpaid work, you know, it relies on people who care enough to donate, or, you know, it relies so heavily on a philanthropic you know, model.
Yeah.
I mean, there's memberships and that sort of thing. So I actually think, and that is something that I'm personally struggling with as well, is people. Well, there's the knowledge. You know, people have actually here. This is a thing overseas, but a lot of people have never heard of a healthy building consultant, and they're kind of like, well, why would I need one?
But it's a bit of a no-brainer, isn't it? I mean, if you have a healthier built environment, healthier buildings, you're not going to have as many sick people or as many people in hospitals.
Yeah.
So we should be talking to the Minister for Planning and the Minister for Health.
It is absolutely preventative health.
Yeah.
Like that's what it
Yeah.
is. It's preventative health. And I think when you were talking before about the cost, yes, often to do this, it is like, I mean, that's the reality. Often it does cost more. It doesn't always. You know, it doesn't necessarily cost more to do some interventions, but some interventions do cost more. But then there's that cost-benefit analysis that has to be done, and the life cycle, and understanding the longer-term impacts, and not just for a particular building, but for a community and as a society. Like the costs add up, and none of that is factored in when we don't think about this sort of stuff. We're losing such a lost opportunity.
Yep.
Sorry, I was going a bit on my high horse there.
Great.
Questions for the panel?
Thank you. I'm just asking for a friend, but what can renters do about mould issues?
SFA. I mean, once mould's there, it's really hard to get rid of, and if you go to your landlord, they're probably going to say, sorry mate, move out. In my experience, it's very, very difficult to get landlords to listen. You can try to clean it. If you are living in a house with porous surfaces, like plasterboard and brick, and mould gets into those surfaces, you cannot get rid of it without physically removing those products. You can kill the surface mould, and you can bleach the surface mould. If you bleach it, I don't fully understand how this works, but I understand that bleach makes mould worse. The chemical reaction makes it worse. And you can dry out mould so it stops growing, but all it needs is a tiny bit of moisture to start proliferating again. The dead spores can still cause health concerns. So once it's in there, it's really, really hard to get rid of. So the idea is, you know, I know someone who also is in your position, Ben, and moved to Melbourne, and their house physically had mushrooms growing in one of the rooms, and they're renting and they have very little power to fix it. The rental market is riddled with mould issues and landlords who don't care. So that's the grim reality. And it's the people who are in those rental situations and have little power that they're really, really suffering, and they go from one mouldy house potentially to another mouldy house because that's just the way of the market. It's really, I don't know, does anyone else have any other suggestions? It's really hard. Sorry, it's a bit doom and gloom.
High-performing rentals. I'm a bit nervous giving Matt the microphone, but I'm going to give it to him. You have a question?
Can I just add something quickly first, Matt? I just did a mould testing course myself, and we had a rental real estate agent in the course. So that was really encouraging. They actually had, this real estate agent had taken it upon himself to understand mould issues and that was great. But yeah, they're few and far between, but they are out there.
I was just going to say one other practical thing. It's not going to get rid of the mould, but you could get a dehumidifier into your space. So that can actually help. If you've dealt with the mould as best you can, that can help prevent the moisture building up again. That's one sort of little intervention.
Using your air conditioner to dehumidify air is also another suggestion, and heating surfaces. So a small heater and a dehumidifier and improved exhaust will at least reduce mould growth and dry surfaces out.
So Fiona, you talked about microplastics and totally agree we need to reduce the amount, but then Jess, you spend your life essentially selling a membrane full of polyethylene membranes. So the issue I see here is the industry can be so divided, and both of you are experts in your own field, but at the end of the day you have what you're trying to achieve the same outcome, but how can we be so divided? And I think we sometimes spend more time arguing between ourselves. So how do we get that message clear to clients? Because at the end of the day, they're so confused when they start reading stuff on social media or reading articles, because the opinions are so different.
Yeah. Look, I don't think that we're opposed and that but there is, I mean, it's silly to not acknowledge that there's a tension. There is a tension between energy efficiency and microplastics. But it's not just about energy efficiency. Microplastics aren't just about energy efficiency.
Totally.
It's about how we build more broadly. And I think that there's a real conversation that has to start happening around that tension, because it's real, it exists. And I would never, ever advocate for not producing an energy efficient home. That is absolutely fundamental to sustainability. But how you do that, and there are architects, I know there's architects that are doing it with as minimal plastics as possible. So it is possible, but it just requires a level of, it notches up the level of knowledge required and the work that has to go into learning that and specifying it, and it's...
So I think it's all good, and if we have an environment, say, out in the sticks where we can build with hemp and all these other things, but when we talk inner city suburbs like this, it's almost impossible. We can't be building 400 mil hemp walls when we only have a 7 metre wide building.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah. Like I don't actually.
Sorry,
have
I'm not trying to pick on you.
No,
I'm just trying to...
I don't have the answer to that, because it is a challenge. But I think what I'm concerned about is that there's no one actually really in the building industry, or very few people in the building industry, recognising that microplastics are a very serious issue that we're only just starting to really understand the health implications of. And so I don't expect that there's answers yet, because we're only just recognising the problem. But I think advocacy for companies who are producing these products and start pressuring, I mean, I know that sort of sounds a bit pie in the sky, but if architects are demanding products that don't have these, chemicals in them, that's where it has to start. It's information and it's innovation, exactly. Yeah, yep. And there are a lot of, there's good labelling systems now. You've got sort of declare labels and that type of thing. So looking at those sort of and the red lists and looking at those chemicals or looking at those companies that are investing, carpet companies that are investing in getting those labels, they're doing it because they do want to produce products that people can specify and know that they're not harming the environment and the people in the environments that architects and builders are creating. What do you reckon? Do you reckon we're in tension?
No, not at all. I think we're working on the same team. But I guess, the products that we sell, the ProClima membranes, I mean, they have a purpose and they're good at their job. So I don't really know how to do that job in a timber-framed wall without including a membrane of that type. So you sort of have to pick your battles a little bit. Prioritise where you use such products and where you can swap them out for something else.
There's also plastics and then there's plastics. So there's different types of plastics, and the products that you're talking about are much lower in and also they're protected. So they're not actually getting exposed to weather and breaking down and creating as many microplastics. So so I think, you know, that idea of balance and being sensible in your approach, you know, I think any sort of hardcore, you know, fundamentalist line becomes problematic. Yeah, you could look for things like, you know, like do an inspection of your building and actually look for, you know, wonky floorboards and things like that, because there could be, you might be doing your landlord a really big favour, like their house could be disintegrating and they might not actually realise that there's a subfloor water issue or, so, I mean, there are those things.
There isn't any.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's really difficult. But there is an organisation called Better Renting. So I'm not an expert on the rental space, but my daughter has been in a really shit position like that as well. It was awful. She had, you know, like stuff coming up through the shower base, like, you know, sewage coming up through the shower base, and, you know, the landlord wouldn't do anything about it. It was riddled with mould. It was horrible. So I absolutely feel your pain. But you can get onto an organisation like Better Renting. I'm not actually spruiking any organisation. I have no affiliation with them or whatever, but maybe that's one place to start looking.
I think talking about energy efficiency has been done to death, and saving money and solar panels and all that sort of thing. So I think what I try and do is get them to compete with each other. So, like, for example, have a blow-it-or test done and then talk about it with your friends and then get them to do a blow-it-or test and then compare results, or, you know, just something silly like that. Somehow make it seem sexy. Somehow make it seem like something that they should want. Sort of moving away from the sort of green speak and making it into an appealing thing somehow. Talking about peace of mind. So I talk about peace of mind rather than energy savings, because how you feel inside a building is much more powerful than, you know, saving money on, I mean, money is also very powerful, but once you understand how different you're going to feel, then I think that's a pretty powerful thing. But converting those who are not yet on board is just getting communication out to them, because some like me, I didn't know about blow-it-or testing, and as soon as I found out about it, I was like, wow, this is awesome. So you don't know what you don't know. You can't. It's just about all of us getting out, communicating on our social media channels, to our friends, whatever we can, communicating, and just hitting the right people, hitting as many people as we can with the right information, and just sort of trying to speak with conviction and speak with all the enthusiasm that we all have, and try to get them as equally interested as we are. Anyone else?
Yes. I don't know if this is working. If you go into an existing home, so not one under construction, and you got your blower door on, what are some of the areas that you look for leaks? And this probably goes to like a rental property where you probably do have significant leaks throughout the house. What are some of the low-hanging fruit that you could do to an existing home to help reduce some of those air changes?
Great question. If it's a timber floor, usually the skirting, behind the skirting, like if it's on stumps, the skirting is usually got, you know, 1/2 inch to 1 inch gap behind it. So that's a really big one that we go to first up. The gaps between floorboards on a raised timber floor as well. I did one test where the result was really high, and I couldn't work out where the air leaks were coming from, and then I went and put my hands on the ground, and it was like an air hockey table. So the floorboards is one, and any electrical and plumbing penetration is going to have a gap around it. Is very likely to have a gap around it that is allowing air leakage, and exhaust fans. So the regulation says that any exhaust fan in a habitable space should be sealed, and there's no regulation around wet area exhaust fans. And they are a very big hole in the building envelope, and if you've got a couple of bathrooms, then that is 2 very large holes in the building envelope that you can very easily and cheaply close. So any electrical and plumbing penetration, usually behind the skirting boards is a big one, and doors and windows. Doors and windows. I've seen a lot of doors with seals on them that don't actually connect and don't actually seal properly. So they're probably the biggest ones.
Not this time. My question is to you, Luke. I particularly loved your saying of using the thermal performance requirements as a driver of aesthetics and sort of architectural choices. And I guess you also then shared a lot on the story of Rick Zen's sort of architecture practice and how it evolved, and there were sacrifices that were made in order to actually produce better homes. I guess for an architect who is approaching it in a business as usual sense and doing minimum compliance, like what are the business sacrifices that need to be made to actually then produce better homes?
So I think how about that? Yep. Look, I think what's driven our practice over the years and the people who have come through the practice is the fact that we're all of shared values, and we're all really committed to living day to day as sustainably as we possibly can. And I think that has led to a lot of longevity of staff within the practice. Most people come and stay for a long time. And I think that makes it easier for us to, I suppose, critique and consider everything that goes into our buildings, more so than somebody just living their everyday life and not considering these things. So I think, when we're talking to new people or new people are coming into the practice, that's a really key consideration for us, probably more so than their professional experience or what university they went to or what private school they went to. We're looking for grassroots people who really care about the environment and want to make a better impact. And I think that there's definitely research involved in every project, and not necessarily stuff that you get paid for, but if you're really engaged and want to drive better outcomes, then that process becomes easier and actually more rewarding. And I think that's what's held our practice together in driving these initiatives.
Do you mind if I just say one thing?
Absolutely.
Just to that, in terms of how you actually get this thing to be heard by other people, I just wanted to shout out, and I don't want to embarrass him, but I caught up with Rick tonight for the first time since he was my tutor in uni, I think maybe second or third year, and he ran a project that really shaped the trajectory of my career and the issue of sustainability. So I think everyone in this room shouldn't underestimate that the things that they're doing are having potentially a ripple effect that they don't even know about. So yeah, sorry to embarrass you.
And just to add to that, it's Fiona's story is told many times over. There's at least a dozen practices who have sprung out of Rick's tutoring over the years, and I think they're all going on to do fantastic things, and I think they've all come from the same place and are now delivering the same message. So yeah, I agree.
Challenging clients has cost us hugely. I can't tell you how many projects we've been sucked on that have been awesome. Like, oh, I want this so bad. But being authentic about things is really critical. I'd rather be sacked from a job than take one on just to pay the bills, and that's a big sacrifice. And everyone that's worked with me would be on board with that, and they've all gone, oh my God, we're losing this job. It hurts, it really hurts. And it goes right to the core of our society too. It really brings it home to you, going, oh my God, we've got a big problem, really big problem. But yeah, that's been the biggest sacrifice I've ever made.
You get sacked on projects because you are pushing things that clients don't want, like in terms of the sustainability stuff?
Just questioning things. People don't like being challenged. They like to be in control and have what they want. And if you ask critical questions, you've got to be prepared to cop the answers. And we try and ask critical questions just to be really honest with people. But you've got to be prepared to then cop it. And we copped it pretty bad.
And those projects are probably more, larger scale community commercial projects that Rick's referring to. Our residential clients and the projects that we spoke about today are generally people who are on board with the ideas from the start. But when you start to challenge institutions, that's when it can get pretty hairy.
So I'm going to bring the vibe up a bit because, it kind of feels all a bit doom and gloom, but like the reality that we have 4 people sitting at the front here giving up their time to talk about healthy homes and health and wellbeing and better buildings, and the fact that all of you are here today giving up your own time, spending your money, sitting here listening to the 4 of these people up here should give you inspiration to know that there are people out there that actually give a fuck and actually want to produce good outcomes for our clients and good homes for our children and for future generations. So this kind of stuff, like I always leave these events feeling really energised because there are people outside of my circle that give a shit. So I want to say thank you for Delia, Jess, Luke and Fiona. And I am conscious of time because Jess needs to jump on a plane. But thank you to everyone for coming here today. I want to give a big shout out to Hygge, Hygge, Moondog for their support tonight. I'll go through this quickly. We do have a podcast, definitely check it out. Next month's event is going to be a webinar, so we're joined by Sarah from Kui Architecture. If you're not on social media, get on social media and follow her because the way that she delivers her message is super engaging. So I'm really excited to get Sarah on board. And lastly, a massive shout out to Architects Declare and also the architects that have come here today. I'm really inspired by the fact that we have this coming together of architects and builders. And, there's 60 odd people in this room today. Next time there's going to be 100, then there's going to be 200. I'm sure this is going to grow. Thank you to everyone for coming